Thank you and good morning to all of you. I have been here on quite a number of occasions addressing the situation in Iran and the situation obviously concerning the violation of human rights in Iran. And as a lawyer, I practice in international law. I'm in a slightly different position to activists. I work with evidence and I analyse evidence. And where there's a dispute on evidence, it's resolved before a court or tribunal that is independent of either side. And this is what is being asked for in Iran. And why should there now be a tribunal set up to look into what I'm now going to talk about, which is the crime against humanity committed in 1988? Why should there be a tribunal? Well, firstly, it is because lawyers like myself, plus activists, having analysed the evidence, say there is no doubt that a crime against humanity was committed in 1988. If Iran disputes that, then that is where we have a justice system in order to hear the dispute. And the progress that has been made since I've been talking about the 1988 killings has been that very recently we've been having more and more engagement from those in positions of power, in positions of government in Iran. And although we might not agree with what they say, that is a positive thing, because the invitation is, rather than giving your defence to the press in an interview, give it before a tribunal and let the actions be judged in the way that actions which comprise allegations of crimes against humanity are to be judged, because this obviously is the history of the UN and is part of its purpose. So the UN also should not shy away from it. Many of you will be familiar, but what I'm talking about is in July 1988, Iran's supreme leader, Khomeini, issued a fatwa ordering the execution of political prisoners, members, sympathizers of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. Now, there were two waves, in fact, of these executions. There was the political prisoners first, and then there was a kind of social cleansing of agnostics, of atheists, the apostates, and actually of those who had left-wing views, as we would label political parties. How it was carried out was through what Khomeini described as amnesty commissions. And as more and more information has been gathered over the years, it's been discovered that the amnesty commissions didn't solely operate in Tehran, but they also operated in 70 provinces and towns in Iran. They became known as death commissions. And you may feel that that description is one which is much more fitting than the label given to them by Khomeini and others. What they did, they rounded up people, including those who had already served sentences issued by courts in Iran, and including those who were in the midst of serving sentences issued by the justice system in Iran. And they put them before the commissions for their own process. They were not trials. They were 2-minute hearings quite often, if that long, because the sheer number was such that there could be no trial. There was no time. There was no investigation. A series of questions were asked which were designed to elicit whether the person could demonstrate sufficient loyalty to Khomeini. If there was hesitation or it was considered that they were insufficiently loyal, they were executed by hanging or a firing squad. Some of the questions included whether the person was willing to clear minefields for the army of the Islamic Republic. A hesitation was a death sentence. All of this is based on evidence that has been collected and compiled. There was a People's Tribunal that was put together in Geneva last February, and I acted as a lawyer to that tribunal, and some of the families of those who had been killed or remain disappeared came and gave evidence. And some of that evidence included a man who spoke of how he only knew of his daughter's execution because he was asked to pay for the bullets that were used to shoot her. There was a woman there, an elderly woman now, who still has hope that her son, who she's not seen since the 1980s, might be in a jail somewhere in Iran, still alive. She won't accept he's dead until she sees his body. Part of the inhumanity of this and why it infects the present is because we know there are mass graves. Again, there's evidence of the mass graves, and the Amnesty reports, which I encourage you to read. There's two particularly substantial reports, set out where the mass graves are, and there's further reports as well, which actually locate where they are. And they're in danger of being destroyed, and that evidence destroyed, unless a tribunal is set up very quickly. So part of the inhumanity is bodies are dumped in mass graves. That again is a human rights violation, and no information is given. Moving on swiftly on evidence, on the 9th of August 2016, an audio tape emerged which is genuine, and it was evidence discussions by Khomeini and others, and in those discussions it was clear that human rights violations were plotted. He was asked, what about the pregnant women? What about the girls, the children? And the answer, as recorded on the audio, was all were to be killed. There was to be no mercy. There's no dispute on that audio, and those who were there have addressed it and applauded it. And so there is no difficulty in finding those who were directing, those who were still alive, because of course Khomeini was under his own death sentence through cancer. But there's no difficulty in actually indicting those who were still alive to be investigated further and prosecuted within an international tribunal, or at least investigated further. Progress is happening in the justice system, but it's still slow. I'm going to move quickly to the present. The late Asma Jahangir, the wonderful Pakistani human rights lawyer who many in this room will have met, including myself, she, in 2017, under her mandate as Special Rapporteur for Iran, reported on the mass executions in 1988 in her report to the General Assembly. And she set out there the details and some details of the 1988 massacre, and it was set out as such as extrajudicial killings. It was on the UN agenda in 2017. Of concern is that the new Special Rapporteur, Javed Rehman, in his first report, appears not to have continued through with the progress that had been made by his predecessor. In simple terms, the 1988 massacre has been dropped from his agenda in the report, and it needs to be put back on there rapidly. So right up to the present, there was an interview published by Mustafa Pour Momhadi on the 25th of July 2019. And he responded to the criticisms and allegations concerning the executions in 1988. And he justified them as being executions of terrorists. This does not fit with the evidence as collected. Many of those who were executed were people handing out leaflets and engaging in peaceful protest and freedom of expression. Children were killed, pregnant women. There was no evidence of terrorism that was investigated by these death commissions. They were 2-minute and moving on to executions. However, if he wishes to make that defence, then it should be heard before a tribunal. And it is encouraging that he appears to be saying that he would wish to address the allegations, but they should now be done after so many years in a judicial context. I'm going to finish at this point with a quote from that, the time of the audio and subsequent, from Montazeri. Montazeri was the only leader in that time in the 1880s who had moral courage to object to the executions that were taking place, that crime against humanity that was taking place in 1988. He said the following: "In my view, the biggest crime in the Islamic Republic, for which the history will condemn us, has been committed at your hands, and they'll write your names as criminals in the history. It is time that we write the history within the judicial setting as to what happened in 1988, and that this crime against humanity is recognised beyond a political sphere, but is recognised within a justice context. Otherwise, I ask rhetorically, what is the point of the UN?" Thank you.